There we go. So again, this is beyond where we're at, but I can go through and I can explain this entire file to you guys if I wanted to, but the point I'm trying to drive home is you don't need to write all of this from memory. You just need to understand what's going on when you're using this code. And so again, real quick, while I'm recording, we're importing this framework for JavaScript. My video just got done saving. And then we're using this package from this website specifically to import all of these HTML files that they have created that we can use. And then this is another part of React that I won't get into. But again, it's the same thing. And if you look, they do the same indentation structure even. And hey, look, a strong tag right there. So I know what's going on here. We're importing their HTML file that is a navbar. We're importing their HTML file that is a navbar brand. We're using their code so that way we don't have to write all of this ourselves. That's what I want to drive home is you don't need to memorize how to write an HTML file from memory. What I want you guys to try and grasp is what you're copying and pasting and why. And so, funnily enough, we already did this challenge together. If you go to Form Basics and you go down to the challenges, you guys probably remember this. We did the username, the favorite color, right? The cohort, the drop down with the radial, all that. Don't forget the button. This is HTML. We don't need to tell the CPU where to put the binary code in order to display this. We don't need to memorize every single tag. We just need to understand that if we put an input type text, we're going to get an input field inside of our HTML form. Again, name isn't going to do anything. I could do break this program, and this is pertinent to JavaScript, but if I change this to placeholder, then we can see it's grayed out. Type in there. Again, input type radio. Don't need that. It changed back to text. Oh, because I guess I would need selections. Try running it again. There you go. So this is what happens if you try to have an input with no selections. And if you ever get in this point and you're like, why isn't this working? Maybe you have like selection 1 equals A, selection 2 equals B, and then you run this and nothing breaks. If you ever get to this point and you're like, what the heck is going on? Like, just Google it. And you'll eventually come to W3, at which point you'll come to this page. Well, you'd probably come to this page, right? So I knew that eventually I would come to this page, but if you were like completely lost, right? If you were here and you're like, why is this not working? I have a selection here, I have a selection there. If we just Google input radio, we have the MDN, which is more very detailed, right? And then we also have, again, W3 with forms, which we've looked at before, and then we also have explicitly just the HTML input type of radio. And we can see here now that, oh, I was doing this wrong, we need to have multiple selections. And so now if I copy this and come back and paste it in and run it, we have this example again. Where we go, oh, okay, cool. As long as we understand why that previous one wasn't working and why this one does work, that's what I want you guys to focus on. I don't want you guys to focus on like memorizing every single HTML element, because that's not what developers do. I showed this already in the other video, but just real quick. it says it right here. Use the select box, but if I was like HTML drop down and I do the first thing, it brings me right to how to create an HTML drop down. So Google's your friend, especially with HTML. HTML is not new. There's a lot of articles on it. There's a lot of documentation on it. If you are looking for how to do something in HTML, you're going to find it. Just make sure you Google it. Don't try to brute force your way through and get frustrated when things aren't working and breaking if you're not at least trying to Google the elements that you're working with already. So just right here, form basics, all we have is just 2 more exercises in the HTML unit. So let's take a look at complex forms. We want to explain what a web form is, what control tags are, build a form with control tags, and then we want checkboxes and radios that are grouped and labeled. At its core, Google's search page is a simple web form with 1 input and 2 buttons. It's definitely a simplified way to put it. These are control tags. I have almost never heard them called that. I almost always hear them called as input tags, even though this one is already an input tag. This is the technical word for these control tags. So here is where the user would be able to interact with your website and give you data that you can work with. Input. So these all actually work. And I will show you how. What a concept that they would have working examples on a website, right? So the first one is email. Now, this isn't going to actually do anything, but if I didn't have an @ symbol here, let's have it submit. Let me just look that up real quick. Input type equals submit. Let's run that. Boom. So hopefully, see that? This is an email input type. If I don't have an @ it's not going to let me. So this is this right here. Let me comment these out just to isolate our concerns. Whoop. Comment those out. So all we're dealing with right now is the email. If I don't put an @ symbol, it's not going to let me submit this. If I put an @ symbol, it's still not going to let me submit it because I don't have, a domain name. Still not going to let me. Okay, never mind, it does. So as long as you have your username and an email type input field with an @ symbol and the domain, it'll let you submit it. Otherwise, it won't recognize it as a actual valid email input, and it will automatically do this. Like, this is my HTML. I'm not like tricking you guys. I'm not running any JavaScript. I'll pull this up. There's nothing here. This is part of HTML. If we have an input type of email, it will not let us submit it without the @. So search. Let's actually just do this. Okay, I'm just gonna delete that. I'm actually not sure what search is gonna do. Where did that undo? All right, let's just erase that. So it looks already like there's some sort of inset. I think that's an inset. If we uncomment, actually, we uncomment all these, we can tell which one's the search because it's this first one with the weird kind of indented look. Again, I'm not, okay, so the search type kind of has this like X button here. I have never used this input type, so I'm actually not too familiar with exactly everything that goes on with this, but if I wanted to learn, you go to input, scroll on down, Here we find all the different types. So again, here's email, hidden, file upload, button, checkbox, blah, 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 blah. We're looking for search. So let's see. We can create them. Blah, 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 blah. So here are specific properties that only apply to search. We can have an autocomplete. We can have autofocus, which means your browser will automatically, when you load into the page, I'm sure Google does this. I don't need to do anything. See how I'm already like, I can just start typing immediately? That's focusing. So the moment I load this page, this search input field is focused. So that's what this is right here, autofocus. Returns whether the field should automatically be focused. That's Google right here. I didn't click on this. I'll keep my cursor over to the left. I'll refresh the page. I'll even click it. But still, the moment I get to the page, I can start typing. That's when we're focused on that field. Default value is going to be, this is different from placeholders. So this is, if I had a default value and I hit enter, it would actually insert that value as the value, whereas placeholder doesn't actually do anything with the value. So if I did default value equals puppy and run that. Oh, it would help if I spelled it right. Did I do it correctly? Yep. So once again, this is probably more of a JavaScript thing. Let's bring that tag back. Let's fix that again. If I type value equals not puppy, we're not going to see this either. Okay, we are. So why did default value not work? This probably only inserts on submit. Run that. I'm guessing, yeah. Sets or returns the default value of a search field. Trying to think of like a useful application of this. If you were building like a really big website and maybe you had something that you just wanted as a fallback for the user to search, if they just left the field empty, it would like auto input this. That would be my guess, but as you can see, I've almost never worked with this, so with default value. It's pretty rare that you'd want to work with default value because that means that you're going to be hard coding in what it should be, and that's typically not what you want. So if I said like default value is 2 and I wanted this to be like a calculator, and I'd say like let's see, value, enter a calculation. If I wanted this to be like, they could come in here and type in something and see. So notice this isn't a placeholder. So when I start typing, it does actually change the text because this is the value. But if I was to not have a value and I had a default value, then when I hit submit, it would evaluate this with this too, right? So it's going to be pretty rare that you're using default value. Typically, you want the input from the user. But again, we can see placeholder. Then we click that. We have the name for JavaScript, the size, type, so on and so forth. So these are the different types. One that I like a lot is password because that changes everything to like the dots that we all know. So that's the next one. So I'm going to type some stuff here, and then I'm going to type some stuff here. That's the password input field. I think we have all seen that before. So hopefully that goes kind of with that explanation as to what that's doing. It's obfuscating the values. Now, if you have a keylogger on your computer, this would compromise your data, obviously, because you're going to be tracking every single key. But all this is doing is essentially hiding the values I'm typing to you guys. The real danger comes into when you copy your password. So if I had a password and I type in password, right? If you copy, darn it, sorry, password. Now, if I copy this, this is saved onto my clipboard, and this is actually stored in your RAM, and if somebody wanted to, they could essentially intercept your internet connection and see what's on your clipboard. And again, this is like, somebody would really have to be wanting to hurt you, but they could essentially steal your password if you copied it and you pasted it into something else, because although it's not shown, this is actually being saved onto like my clipboard right now. On Linux, I know for a fact you can actually go through your clipboard history, but as far as I know on Windows and Mac, you can't. So don't be scared of like just typing in your password. If you have a keylogger, like you're SOL, but if you're at the point where you have a keylogger, I have to kind of question what you were doing. But if you're just typing in your password, the only danger of your password being compromised, other than the people that you're sending your password to being compromised, is you copying it. This right here, nobody's ever going to be able to tell my password if I just type it in and hit submit. They're never going to be able to track that. It takes significantly more work to figure out what I just typed, like with a keylogger, than if I was to type in my password and then copy this, because now it's saved on my RAM and they can read that. They would have to actually be tracking the keys that I'm stroking, keystroke. They would have to be tracking my keystrokes in order to see what my actual password is if I was inputting it into this field. So that's why the dots are there, is so that nobody who's watching you enter it can see it, and so that way when you send it across the internet, nobody saw you input it, and you're safe and set to go. The danger is when you copy it and you paste it in. Because then now on my clipboard there's a string that says password. And even if I copy something else like this, and I start pasting this, its password is still on my clipboard. So do not copy and paste your passwords. That is a security vulnerability that I think people don't necessarily realize. It's significantly safer to just type in your passwords. I'm gonna guess this is a telephone. I'm wondering if I start typing in numbers. Nope. I'm guessing this is just supposed to be for a telephone. I would have hoped that it would have like inserted these dashes in there. I guess not. And then URL. Doesn't seem to care. I can still submit it. Oh, cool. All right. Let's see if I can't submit a string here. What? String. So, interesting. It knew that this wasn't a valid URL, so that's why it errored out. But as long as you leave your URL field empty, then it's okay with it. Maybe this is where you'd want to have like a default value, return to homepage, right? And so if nobody typed in anything here and they just hit submit, maybe you just have them go back to your homepage, like, oh, you probably didn't mean to actually go there or something like that, right? This would be an example where you would use default value. But when I actually start typing in something here, it's like, hey, that's not a URL. Please give me a URL. And really, the inputs you're going to be dealing with the most are email, text, and password. Those are the three most common for fairly obvious reasons. It's pretty rare you're going to use telephone. It's pretty rare you're going to ask somebody for a URL input. And if you do need a URL input, you can just use text, because you just grab the text that they input and then you just use that URL. Input type color. Let's see these. Not going to spend too much time on these. But we can go ahead and see them. again, this is all just copying and pasting. This is all HTML. I have my opening form up here, closing form down here, just with my input type of submit. If I wanted to, I could do button as well. This is a button. This is not the same as an input type submit, because the input type submit is specifically correlated to the form tag that it's in. So as a matter of fact, I just realized I've been indenting all of this incorrectly. We need to push this in 1. Because form opens here, form doesn't close, so we indent 1. Input is self-closing, input is self-closing, so on and so forth. Here, the proper indentation would probably be this, like that. So we have button open on the same line it closes. This would be still proper indentation. Now, if this had another button in it, buttonception, button. Oops. And here is JS Fiddle trying to help me out. This is where I would need to indent one more time, because now we can't close that on the same line, so we would pump this in 1, and then this is where we would have our text. So as long as we can open it and close it on the same line, we can have it in the same indentation. Otherwise, we're going to need to pump it in 1 more. So this is fine because we can open and close it. I'm curious as to what that looks like. It doesn't actually work how we expect it to. It doesn't put a button inside of a button. It just creates 2 buttons side by side. But this would be proper HTML indentation. There's a color input. Get a cool little wheel. It even has profiles, it looks like. If we wanted to grab this color of red, now we have that color of red. Close out of that. So input type date, file. Files are actually tricky because browsers are designed to protect users from malicious files. So there's a little more work that needs to go into allowing users to like upload and download files. We don't need to really worry about that right now, but just know that it's not as easy as just doing an input type file. There's a couple more steps that you would need to do if you wanted people to be able to like upload their own file, such as like having your own server for them to store the information, making it so that the browser is okay with the methodology that you're using, so that it's not like, hey, why is this random web page trying to access my restricted libraries, so on and so forth. But you can see essentially what it looks like. Submit. That would never go anywhere. Number, has to be a number. Trying to type in letters doesn't let me. The moment I start typing in numbers, it does. And we have a range. So let's look up range. Are there any questions real quick? HTML, is this making sense? Here we go. Min and max value of the range. Min equals 0, max equals 1. Doesn't have any tooltips, unfortunately, but this could be maybe where you would have a span underneath it. Enter a number between 0 to 20. Run. Submit. There we go. Different input types. Flex forms. Radios again. If you want an option pre-selected, you could throw in this checked tag on a radio type. So this would be kind of similar to like default value. If you wanted to make sure at least one value was picked if somebody didn't click something. Same thing here. You might notice that we have a radio up here and a checkbox down here. The biggest difference between a radio and a checkbox is radios only allow one option, but checkboxes allow for more than one option. So you can check multiple options in a checkbox, but in a radio you can only select one. There's only one radio, you can have multiple checks. Who wrote this, man? For all intents and purposes, you probably don't need to worry about hidden fields. Hidden fields are mostly used behind the scenes by developers to enact functionality that they don't want you to see, hence the hidden tag. But if you're using an input field, you probably want people to see it. So it's good to know that this is a thing. I can't imagine you guys are going to be using this anytime soon in any practical sense. Label. So we're wrapping the input in the label, and you can see again they indent it. I think the proper indentation would be to have this come back and be on the same line as the input, but we can go ahead and copy them. And so here we could see what this looks like. Without any without any styling, it might as well just be floating text. But having a label here is going to help for when you're making your own index, your own HTML files, because it's going to separate that data and your computer is going to know that that specific floating text is correlated with that input field. So it looks kind of weird here, but if we had a much larger file and we had like several divs nested within this structure, then it would make a little more sense to have a label here. Again, this is CSS. So we could see here that the label is also turned green in addition to the input. So this is why you would want to maybe have this label over the input, so that way you could like specifically color it or move it around and have it be associated with this input field. So that's the purpose of a label. For I actually don't know what, let's see. I have never used for, so this is on the label. If we go to HTML objects, HIJKL label, I don't see anything that says for. It's probably why I've never seen it. This is probably deprecated. This probably was used for something at one point and is no longer in use. That's not to say that you can't use it. Label for me, it's not going to error out. But since there's no documentation on it, I have to assume that it's been phased out and is no longer used in common HTML JavaScript today. Selects again. So instead of radios, we have options. Paste those in. We kind of saw this. This is similar to the drop down. Whoever wrote this curriculum loves hip hop. Got Jamie Foxx, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. button. Common attributes. We can take a look at MDN if we want to look at the attributes, or again, W3. These are essentially attributes, properties. It's anything that you're going to input after you declare it. So this is all DOM. Am I in the DOM section? I'm not. HTML label. There we go. So for some reason it was bringing up the DOM. Here we go, 4. Found it. Specifies which form element a label is bound to. If it's the element ID, you might as well just use ID. But if you don't want to use ID, you can use for. What am I talking about? I'm talking about this right here. This is the same thing. So you can use ID, or you can use for. It's up to you. Again, so attributes. The reason it said properties is because that was JavaScript. HTML, it's attributes. But when they say properties in JavaScript, they're talking about HTML attributes. They're just called different things because of the context that they're applied. Bootstrap. I showed you guys the React version of Bootstrap. This is vanilla Bootstrap, just with normal HTML. So here we're seeing that viewport word again. And this is actually in our boilerplate, if I'm not mistaken. Right here. Viewport with device width, initial scale is 1. Same thing. So boilerplate takes care of that for us. You guys probably don't need to worry too much about the viewport, again, because this is more concerning, like if you're programming for the phone and you're programming for a tablet, all those sorts of things. That's when you'd want to start having concerns with the viewport. But for right now, all you guys need to worry about is just, again, and this doesn't even need to be here. It's just as a safeguard to make sure that when the page loads, it takes a snapshot of the client's viewport, and then it sets the content scale to be one-to-one with their viewport. You don't need this here in order to display data, but it might like slightly move some of your styling if you're doing it with like pixels, for instance. Background colors with hexes on body. Containers, so divs are containers. We'll talk about container fluid later, but if you're so inclined to get into Bootstrap right now, this is what I was talking about earlier. These would be breakpoints with phones. So if your phone is a 768 pixel device, then it would use this breakpoint. If your device is a 992 pixel, so on and so forth, larger one, 1200. These are all where your CSS HTML elements would stop rendering at a certain point and break down into the next line below that if it hits this pixel limit. So this is how you can go to the same website on your phone and your computer and it looks two completely different ways. It's because they're taking advantage of this like media breakpoint system. We have grid options again. We'll get more into this. This is a breakdown of how Bootstrap works. It's a 12-column system. So when we start talking about Bootstrap, we're going to be declaring classes, divs like this, and Bootstrap's going to do everything for us. So if we had Bootstrap running and we just typed this in to our document, it would render this. So let's try that. Take all this, delete it, save it, HTML. Now, I don't have the CDN, so let me paste this in first before I lose it. getting started. You guys don't need to do this. So here's the CDN. It's just as easy as this. Again, we want it in our head. And then I'll open this and make sure it's saved. Now, they had it colored, but you can see I have the exact same thing they did. But the significance of this is it took a snapshot of my viewport and it sectioned it off into 12 pieces. So each of these ones makes up the whole of 12. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. This is the beauty of Bootstrap. It makes it much easier to, if I wanted to have one element, if I wanted to have one element take up 66% of the screen and then the other one take up 33%, 33%, oh, that's a number, and 66%, save that. So I have 66% across 66% of the screen, and then I have 33% across 33% of the screen. This is what Bootstrap helps us with, is we just type in a divisible number of 12, and it segments off a part of that screen for us within that ratio of 12. So 8/12 is 66%, right? And then 4/12 is 33%, 1/3. And all I did to get Bootstrap to work was just copy and paste from here the CDN. This is a content delivery network. And it's literally just as easy as you just copy and paste these tags. Now, it looks like, actually, now that I'm reading this, I didn't even need to do that. Here it says this is an optional theme if I wanted to use this. This is the latest compiled and minified CSS. So if I wanted to, this should just work with just this one tag. Let's save. And accidentally open Postico. Still works. So here's 66% again. You don't need all of these CDNs. It's just showing you the different pieces. We talked about minified a little bit earlier. You guys don't need to worry about this. This is like microseconds of efficiency, if that. This is just saying instead of using their normal long verbose variable names, they decided to rename, like if it said var this variable changes colors. Instead of it being this variable changes colors, it would just be E. So that would be minifying the JavaScript. That's the only difference between this and this, is they minified the CSS up here. Down here they minified the JavaScript. At the end of the day, they do the same thing. And the efficiency that you would get from switching between minified JavaScript and CSS is going to be so nominal that it really doesn't matter. If you were using Node, you could do this, and then we could type in require bootstrap at the top. We're not going to worry about that. Just use the CDN. It's a lot easier. You just copy and paste it in, right? But if we were using a Node project, you would just type in npm install. It would put it in this Node modules folder, and then you would just have to type require bootstrap at the top, like you guys saw in my React projects earlier. And this is essentially like where we're headed to. This is where we want to be by next week, is with Bootstrap. So the reason I got onto Bootstrap is because at the end of Complex Forms they talk about it. The slides, another JS Fiddle challenge. What is the challenge? Fix the errors in the form. Okay. Let me see if I can't. What are the errors they are looking for? If you guys notice it before I do, please tell me. This one? Ah, there you go. Nice. Do you prefer Robert or Roberto? Okay. So Roberto noticed that um, earlier, if you recall, I said that radios should only ever provide one selection, and Roberto noticed that if we click on any of these radios, that they allow me to select them all, which is not what we want. We want that functionality in the checkboxes, but not in the radios. As a matter of fact, I'm clicking right now, and it's not letting me unselect this. So, good eye. I actually didn't notice that. And I can see why. I'll leave that one for you guys. If that ends up being too hard, we can come back to this one. But there is a reason that is fairly simple as to why this isn't working. You could say that these necessarily aren't connected in any way. They're not together. They don't know that each other is selected because they're missing some sort of container. I'll give you that as a little. I'll give you that as a hopefully that's a good enough of a nudge in the right direction. So here's where maybe Git is going to be a problem for some people because we haven't been working with Git. We may have forgotten how to do this. Now, the way this exercise works is we're going to take a look at these pictures and simply try to recreate them. And I'll yeah, very nice and simple. These aren't input fields, these are just text fields. So if I was going to do this, I'm actually going to stop the recording.